So what I wanted to do today was to talk about de-emphasizing awakening. The reason I wanted to record this video is what I've noticed recently is I'm talking more and more about trying to put down this desire to wake up or this desire for enlightenment, and that if we can put this desire down, that consequently what can happen is we're more likely to experience our natural way of being, as opposed to putting ourselves under so much pressure that we have to wake up or that we have to enlighten. The reasoning for this is over the last couple of years I've worked with a group, and I've worked with quite a few obviously through meetings and obviously also on a one-to-one basis. And what I found is that initially everybody comes in and there's obviously a bit of a problem in their lives. They hear about this thing called enlightenment or awakening and decide that this is it for them. They then turn up in meetings. They've heard about this this here and now, so then decide that they need to wake up here and now. And what you find is a lot of seekers then will put themselves under quite a bit of pressure that they really want to wake up, and that itself becomes this barrier. As Rumi stated, your task is not to seek for love, it's to eliminate those barriers. Well, we create this huge barrier when we decide that we want to wake up and we want to wake up right now, without really an understanding of why we want to wake up, or if it is that we actually even want to wake up. And this video really is kind of to address that, but also kind of to add on to an article as well that I wrote that's on my website called Radical Honesty, in which one of the things I stated was that unless we understand why we're in that room, no amount of meetings, no amount of sitting in the presence of a teacher or doing satsangs or reading about this or even watching videos like this is going to help. Because what I'm finding is this thing called enlightenment and awakening, the further I go down, is just this catch-all term. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what awakening is or what even enlightenment is. However, when we hear it as the cure to all our ills, we immediately decide that this is what we want to do. And that invariably leads us to this place of spiritual bypassing, whereby we're not dealing why we're actually in that room and just literally screaming, we want to be awakened, we want to be awakened, we want to be awakened. And I had a beautiful conversation a couple of days ago with this lady who comes to talks, and she kind of exclaimed that she couldn't believe that, like, obviously, back in the day, she'd just been going on about awakening and awareness and enlightenment. And what was beautiful was when she said, what do these terms even mean? And that's such a valid point. What do these terms mean? And yet every year millions of seekers around the world are enslaved by these terms and literally stop functioning in their natural way of being in order to try and act or do a certain way. So we take on certain rituals, we take on certain teachers, we take on certain pointers, and in that is the death of our own natural way of being and our own natural authenticity. And this is something that's been coming up a lot. So, recently what I've been talking about is really trying to be honest with ourselves as to why we're actually sitting in this room, really identifying why we're sitting in this room, because sometimes it can be that we're there because life is failing or there is some pain. And that pain, which I equate to the wound, as Rumi so beautifully put it, is where the light enters, and it's also the beginning of our path. But what we can do is when we walk into these rooms and we hear awakening and enlightenment, we can discard our path. We can discard our very salvation by then going on about the fact that, oh my God, I want to be awakened, I want to be awakened, I want to be awakened. And that then just creates this huge barrier, which basically means that we may think that we're traveling, we may think that we are realizing things, we may think that because we've taken on a new language or a new teacher or a new pointer that we're going somewhere. But until we honestly address what the real issue is, we're nowhere near the goal. We're nowhere near being who we truly are. And sometimes if we can just be really honest with ourselves and really sit there and go, why am I actually here? As uncomfortable as that may be, we may find that it's not really to wake up or enlighten. And consequently, what may happen is if we actually deal with the issue that's at hand, for example, in my case, it was heartbreak. But rather than dealing with it, I decided to take the long and winding road of enlightenment or awakening, only to realize really that at the end of that journey, all I'd really wanted to do was to be rid of my pain. Had I been honest with myself at the very beginning, which I suppose I couldn't at the time, but say I had been able to be honest with myself, I may have found that I may not have taken this journey, and consequently, functioning in my natural well-being may have just occurred naturally without need to put myself under pressure or engage in this long fanciful journey and sit with all these teachers and what have you. And I know that we can talk about the fact that, well, that was meant to happen, it's happening as it is. But sometimes I think we can again take statements like that it's happening as it is, and we can engage in this beautiful spiritual bypassing. And enlightenment and awakening now are becoming this amazing bypass that so many people are using because they don't want to honestly look at what's actually going on in their lives. And yet, if they were to actually just take their time, because I'm emphasizing this a lot, that just literally take our times, don't worry about what the other person's doing, and just slowly but surely just really look at what it is that ails us, we may find that being able to, address the wound allows that light, and to accept that wound allows that light to enter. And we may consequently then find that the very thing that we've been harking on about, that we really, really want to be enlightened, may just occur naturally without need for effort or trying to understand. And this is witnessed by the fact that so many people now are just literally just waking up, walking down the street, or they're washing dishes, or they're doing just something ordinary, and this natural way of being just breaks forth. And if that's the case, then I don't know why we're putting so much pressure on ourselves and so much emphasis on we have to wake up, or we have to enlighten, because all that does is it just creates another barrier, and it creates pressure. And that pressure just mounts the more meetings we go to, the more we meet other seekers, because some might be so together as far as you're concerned. One of my earliest memories of being with my first teacher was that there were people in that room who just looked like they had everything together. And I'd be sitting there in the corner confused. And then seeing these people would add to the pressure, add to that feeling of loathing, unworthiness, that I've been sitting here all these years and I really don't have an idea as to what's going on. And what that did was just literally put more and more pressure upon me, until I literally had to leave. I cracked in the sense that, look, I couldn't be there. Being around the teacher was a trigger. He would walk into one, he'd walk in through one door and I'd run out the other, because I was under so much pressure to try and get it right, to try and understand it. And I see that happening, even in the talks that I do, that some people are putting themselves under so much pressure because they've heard of this thing called awakening, and it's created this desperation in them that life isn't working, but if I go down that route of awakening, something may happen. Life will magically work itself out. Life, unfortunately, doesn't most of the times work itself out. So why not just take that pressure off ourselves, and literally, by being kind to ourselves and really just taking our time, identify by being honest with ourselves what it is that we really want, why we are really there. And what we may find is when we start dealing with that this whole idea of awakening and enlightenment becomes de-emphasized in our lives. And I'm watching with absolute pleasure, the group I have around me, and now moving away from all the buzzwords, and now moving away from this, I want to be enlightened, I want to be, enlightened now. And consequently, what's happening is a lot of them are now just starting to function very naturally in this natural way of being that they've been seeking for so long. And yet it's occurring naturally without an emphasis on it, or without a need or a desire for freedom. And I feel that's a beautiful thing, because sometimes the last desire to fall is that desire to go free. And it is that one that's most insidious, and it's also that one that really traps us, because I see so many well-meaning people whose lives aren't working, who are terrified of actually dealing with the actual issue, but have found this almost, security blanket of enlightenment, and they're cloaked in it, and they're nowhere nearer to being who they actually are, living in a natural way of being, simply for the fact that there's such a pressure on them that, oh, I've got to wake up, and once I wake up I can live my life. Life is happening regardless of whether you wake up or not. And sometimes just that acceptance of that life and that acceptance of that pain and that fear makes us braver, stronger people. And what we find then, that life is this beautiful symphony of all of these thoughts, feelings and emotions without need for explanation or without need to know. And that in itself is our natural way of being. And as we start experiencing that more and more, we start trusting ourselves. That trust deepens, that realization of who we are deepens, and we may find that we don't need these 1 in a million events, because sometimes those 1 in a million events are actually just happening because we're desperate, because life isn't working. But if we can take our time and just slowly but surely start working at looking at the issues, and I fully concede that some may be so painful that we don't want to look at them, that's fine. If we start with what we can do, I think it was St. Francis of Assisi who once stated, you start by doing what's possible, and then sooner or later, and please, let me know if that's the right quote there. You start by doing what's possible, and sooner or later you're doing what you feel is impossible. So the real path starts with the issue. It starts with what actually ails us. And if we can take our time, what we may find is that this additional pressure that we put on ourselves of, I want to be enlightened or awakened now because it's magically going to take away all my problems, may just beautifully be de-emphasized. And what we may find then is that we are living in our natural way of being, without effort, without understanding, without explanation. And isn't that what we're all searching for?